Let's not sugarcoat this. The world is a geopolitical mess right now, and things aren't exactly getting better. Russia's been dragging out its war in Ukraine for years now. China's practically doing push-ups in the Taiwan Strait. The Middle East is one spark away from turning into a regional bonfire. And somehow, North Korea keeps launching missiles like they're testing fireworks for a holiday nobody invited them to. The uncomfortable truth? World War III isn't some far-fetched Hollywood plot anymore. It's a legitimate conversation happening in intelligence agencies, military briefings, and dinner tables across the globe. Now, here's where it gets really fun. Unlike World Wars I and II, where the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans gave certain countries a nice safety buffer, modern warfare doesn't care about your geography degree. Hypersonic missiles can cross continents in minutes. Submarine-launched nukes can pop up anywhere. Even the United States, sitting pretty behind two massive oceans for the better part of 2 centuries, would get a front-row seat to the fireworks this time around. So where exactly would you go if the world decides to collectively lose its mind? Before you panic book a one-way ticket to Antarctica to hang out with the penguins, let's talk about what actually makes a place safe when the missiles start flying. You need to think beyond just distance. You need countries that aren't already neck-deep in the geopolitical mess that would start this whole nightmare. You need places that won't become strategic prizes worth fighting over. You need spots so irrelevant to military planners that they wouldn't waste a single cruise missile on them. And ideally, you want locations far enough from the actual battlefields that collateral damage isn't going to ruin your day. Sound impossible? It's not. But it's also not as simple as picking a nice beach and calling it a day. If you're watching this video, you're probably the type of person who likes to have a plan, even if it's for the worst case scenario. So stick around because we're about to take you on a global tour of the places that might actually keep you alive when the world goes sideways. And hey, if you find this video helpful or at least mildly entertaining while contemplating global catastrophe, do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content that walks the fine line between educational and existentially terrifying. And drop a comment letting me know if you think I'm completely off base or if you've got your own bunker plans brewing. All right, let's get into it. The Pacific hideaways. Let's start in the Pacific because if you're going to ride out the apocalypse, you might as well do it somewhere with decent weather, right? The Pacific Ocean is massive. We're talking about more than 60 million square miles of water dotted with thousands of islands. Most of them nobody cares about, militarily speaking. That's exactly what you want. But here's the catch. Not all Pacific islands are created equal when it comes to safety. The United States has this little thing called the island chain strategy. Basically, imagine 3 giant defensive lines stretching from Japan down through Indonesia, then out through the Pacific. These chains are designed to contain China's military ambitions and protect American interests in the region. So if you're island shopping, you need to think about where these invisible battle lines are drawn. Let's cross some places off your list immediately. Guam? Absolutely not. It's home to one of America's largest military bases in the Pacific. That's basically a giant target painted in neon saying, "Please fire your hypersonic missiles here." The Solomon Islands, Palau, and Kiribati have all gotten tangled up in great power politics recently, with China trying to expand its influence and the US pushing back. When the shooting starts, these places could find themselves in very uncomfortable positions. But Fiji? Now we're talking. Fiji sits comfortably outside the first island chain, which means it's not going to be an immediate battlefield. The closest potential war zone would be Australia, which is still about 1,900 miles away. That's a decent buffer. Fiji also doesn't have much to offer strategically. No major military bases, no rare strategic resources that can't be found elsewhere. Its military is tiny, around 6,500 active troops with another 6,200 in reserve. That's not enough to make any great power think twice about anything. Here's another advantage. Fiji has no formal military alliances, which means it's not one of those dominoes that automatically falls when the shooting starts. It can plausibly declare neutrality, and most countries would probably shrug and move on to more important targets. And get this, Fiji isn't just one island. It's an archipelago of about 300 islands. That gives you options. If one area starts looking sketchy, you can literally island hop to somewhere more remote. What about food? Well, Fiji's fisheries pull in over 36,000 tons of fish every year, with more than 300 species to choose from. If you get tired of seafood, which honestly would take a while, there's almost 77,000 hectares of arable land, producing bananas, potatoes, coconuts, pineapples, and even kava. That root they turn into a drink that's basically Pacific alcohol. Parts of the country get enough rain to support poultry, pigs, and cattle. There's sugarcane if you need your sweet fix, and yes, even chocolate. So you're not going to starve. But let's be real for a second. Fiji isn't foolproof. If World War III turns into a long, dragged-out disaster, and China somehow manages to break through the first island chain, Fiji suddenly becomes a lot less safe. If the war pushes out to the second and third island chains, which run right through parts of Fiji's territory, you've got problems. And while Fiji doesn't have strategic resources now, a desperate warring power might suddenly find timber, precious metals, copper, and potential offshore oil worth their attention. It's unlikely, but wars have a funny way of changing everyone's priorities. So maybe you want something even more remote. Enter Tuvalu. If Fiji is off the beaten path, Tuvalu is off the map entirely. It's about 705 miles north of Fiji, which puts it even further from any likely battlefield. We're talking about one of the world's least populated countries. Only around 11,000 people spread across 10 square miles of land. For perspective, that's smaller than most medium-sized American towns. Tuvalu has no treaty alliances, so neutrality is actually a realistic option here. Its tiny size and population mean that no military strategist is going to waste time planning operations there. Sure, Tuvalu recognizes Taiwan instead of mainland China, which annoys Beijing. But Tuvalu is so far from China and so strategically worthless that even an angry Xi Jinping probably wouldn't bother sending missiles this direction. Food situation? You'll be eating a lot of fish. The fishing industry directly employs 42% of the population, and the country's exclusive economic zone is 34,000 times larger than its land area. Tuna makes up about 90% of the catch, but there are 194 species total if you want variety. On land, coconuts are everywhere, though your diet won't be as diverse as Fiji's. Less stuff growing means fewer reasons for anyone to invade you, though, so there's a trade-off. The downside? You're going to see the same faces every single day. With 1,100 people per square mile, Tuvalu is densely packed. Hope you're good at making friends and keeping peace with your neighbors because you'll be stuck with them for the duration. Also, Tuvalu recognizing Taiwan could become a problem if China starts getting aggressive in that direction. If Chinese ships and planes become a regular sight near Tuvalu, that's your signal that the war isn't going well, and you should probably have a backup plan. New Zealand. Now let's talk about New Zealand because I know what you're thinking. New Zealand shows up on literally every safest places in World War III list. It's ranked second on the Global Peace Index. It's beautiful, developed, and isolated. What's the catch? Well, the catch is that New Zealand isn't actually neutral. It's part of the Five Eyes intelligence network with the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. It's also in the five-power defense arrangements with the US, Australia, UK, and Singapore. These aren't NATO-level mutual defense treaties, but they're definitely not nothing. New Zealand is woven into the security architecture that would pull it into any major conflict. And unlike Fiji or Tuvalu, New Zealand actually has stuff worth fighting over. Hydrocarbons, iron ore, timber, gold. If you're a warring nation desperate for resources, New Zealand starts looking pretty interesting. So why is it still on the list? Distance. Glorious, wonderful distance. New Zealand sits over 2,000 miles southeast of Australia. That's far enough that even if you're China and you've somehow managed to push through the first island chain and secure Australia's trade routes, reaching New Zealand is still a logistical nightmare. China doesn't have the force projection capability to seriously threaten New Zealand, at least not for the foreseeable future. And if China is bombing New Zealand, that means things have gone so catastrophically wrong that we're probably already in the nuclear winter phase anyway. Military units aren't going to be concentrated in New Zealand during the war's early phases, which means it's unlikely to eat a bunch of missiles. Sure, it could happen. Wars are unpredictable. But probability-wise, you're safer in New Zealand than almost anywhere else in the region that still has first-world infrastructure. And speaking of infrastructure, that's New Zealand's major selling point over places like Fiji and Tuvalu. New Zealand is a fully developed country. Reliable power, modern healthcare, functional government institutions. Around 30% of its land is protected wilderness, which gives you plenty of places to disappear if things get really bad. Let's talk about those sheep everyone jokes about. As of May 2023, New Zealand had 25.13 million sheep. With a population of 5.3 million people, that's almost 5 sheep per person. Why does this matter? Because in World War III, global supply chains are going to collapse. That means textiles are going to be hard to come by. Those sheep represent a massive source of wool for making clothes. They're also a protein source if you need meat, and you can milk them in a pinch. But here's what really matters. New Zealand is self-sufficient in food production. It doesn't rely on international trade to feed its population the way China does. The country grows oats, wheat, barley, corn, peas, lentils, and clovers on its farms. Being an island nation, there's an abundance of fish. Kingfish, snapper, yellowfin tuna, Chinook salmon. You'll eat well. New Zealand has also been walking a diplomatic tightrope between its traditional Western allies and China, which is its largest trading partner. There's no guarantee it would automatically be dragged into the war, especially if it can position itself as neutral early on. That's optimistic, maybe even naive, but it's not impossible. The real question is whether you can get there. If commercial air travel shuts down when tensions spike, you're going to need a boat. And if you're already in Europe or the Americas, that's a very long boat ride. So maybe you need to look closer to home. Iceland. If you're in Europe or North America, Iceland might be your best bet. And yes, I know, Iceland is part of NATO. That immediately makes it a belligerent if Article 5 gets triggered. But hear me out. Iceland has no standing army. None. According to the Global Firepower Index, Iceland's military strength is basically zero. It has a coast guard with small arms and some radar stations, but that's it. The country has maintained practical neutrality for a millennium. It didn't participate in any wars throughout its history until it joined NATO, and even then, its contribution to operations like Afghanistan was mostly symbolic and PR-related. Geography helps a lot here. Iceland is in the middle of the North Atlantic, about halfway between North America and Europe. Its closest neighbors are Greenland and the Faroe Islands, neither of which are military powerhouses. Russia would have to cross a lot of NATO-controlled water to reach Iceland, and given the current state of the Russian Navy, which Ukraine has been dunking on in the Black Sea, despite not having a navy, this doesn't seem likely. Now, there is one problem. Iceland sits on something called the Gjögr Gap. That's the waterway between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. During the Cold War, this gap was critically important because it controlled shipping lanes between the Norwegian Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. Controlling the Gjögr Gap meant NATO could prevent the Soviet Navy from projecting power into the world's oceans. With great power competition heating up again, especially around Arctic shipping routes, the gap matters again. Iceland also hosts Naval Air Station Keflavik on the Reykjanes Peninsula in the southwest. This base can host B-2 bombers, and it did exactly that in 2021. The upcoming B-21 Raider will probably deploy there too. That makes Keflavik a juicy target for Russian missiles. So, rule number 1 if you're going to Iceland, stay away from Keflavik. But everywhere else? Probably fine. Iceland's homeland would be well protected by NATO naval forces. Russia doesn't have the naval capacity to seriously threaten Iceland's core territory anymore. The Russian Navy is, to put it kindly, not doing great. Any serious attempt to use the Gjögr Gap offensively would probably end badly for Moscow. Let's talk about survival resources. Iceland's fishing industry is legendary. It was the backbone of the economy from the 9th to the 20th centuries. It still makes up 11% of GDP and almost 39% of exports. Over 1.1 million tons of fish were caught in 2021. Atlantic salmon, Atlantic cod, various halibuts. You're not going hungry? Energy is where Iceland really shines. The country is completely energy self-sufficient. 73% of its electricity comes from hydroelectric power plants. The remaining 27% comes from geothermal sources. And here's the kicker. 90% of Iceland's houses are heated directly by geothermal water through pipelines. Even if the power grid goes down, you're probably not freezing to death. Iceland's only energy vulnerability is transportation fuel. It still needs to import fossil fuels for cars and trucks. But Iceland has been aggressively adopting electric vehicles to fix this problem. In the first half of 2022, 85% of private cars sold were electric. That was up from 60% in 2021 and 46% in 2020. Electric vehicles make up about 14% of the total fleet now, with one of the fastest adoption rates in the world. So, if you need to evacuate from Keflavik when the war starts, there's a decent chance you can grab an electric car and drive it using Iceland's renewable power grid. The major downside is that Iceland is small and isolated. The population averages about 3 people per square kilometer. If you value having neighbors and community, this might not be your spot. But if you're trying to avoid nuclear missiles and survive on fish and geothermal energy, you could do a lot worse. The Azores. Alright, maybe freezing temperatures aren't your thing. Maybe you want something that combines relative safety with a climate that doesn't require thermal underwear year-round. Let's talk about the Azores. The Azores are an autonomous region of Portugal, sitting about 870 miles west of Lisbon in the middle of the Atlantic. Because Portugal is part of NATO, the Azores would technically be belligerent territory in World War III. But here's the thing. The Azores are so far behind the GIUK gap and so distant from European battlefields that they're basically untouchable for most adversaries. The climate is fantastic. Thanks to the Gulf Stream, temperatures stay in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit year-round. No blazing heat, no bitter cold. Just pleasant, mild weather while the world burns around you. There is one military concern. The Azores host Lajes Field on Terceira Island, about 9.3 miles northeast of Angra do Heroísmo. Around 600 U.S. Department of Defense personnel are stationed there. Lajes is an important logistics hub for NATO operations across the Atlantic. It hosts C-17 transport aircraft and KC-46 Pegasus refueling planes. During Operation Desert Storm, Lajes played a crucial support role. In any major war, it would do the same. That makes Lajes a missile target. So rule number 1, don't live near Lajes Field, but everywhere else in the Azores? You're probably fine. Food situation is interesting. The fishing industry is surprisingly small because the local ecosystem is fragile. Between 13,000 and 15,000 tons of fish are caught annually, with employment for only about 500 people. That's not a ton compared to Iceland or Greenland, but if you're just trying to survive, it's adequate. The real advantage is agriculture. The Azores have 26 active volcanoes, 8 underwater. Volcanic soil is incredibly fertile. Combined with a Mediterranean to subtropical climate, you get fantastic conditions for growing crops. Bananas, pineapples, yams, potatoes including sweet potatoes, tomatoes, cereals, and tea. There's a strong dairy sector: pigs, poultry, goats, and sheep. Your diet would be well balanced and diverse. You're not going to starve, and you're not going to get scurvy either. The only real downside beyond Lajes Field being a target is that the Azores might get crowded. It's already a popular tourist destination. When World War III kicks off, a lot of people are going to have the same idea you do. Water supply is already strained by tourism, with over-extraction and contamination being ongoing problems. In wartime, water rationing might become necessary, but honestly, water rationing beats getting vaporized. South America. Here's something people don't talk about enough. South America is probably going to be the safest continent during World War III. No South American country is deeply entangled in the military alliances that would drag them into the conflict. The continent is geographically isolated from the main theaters of war in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And most South American nations have adopted a foreign policy approach that keeps them out of other people's fights. Of course, the Brazilian rainforest is technically the safest place. Uncontacted hunter-gatherer tribes still live there, completely isolated from modern civilization. If you can survive among them, you'd be about as far from the war as humanly possible. But let's be honest, if you're watching this video, you're not going to thrive as a hunter-gatherer in the Amazon. Something or someone would probably kill you before the war even mattered. So, let's talk about places where you can maintain some connection to modern life while still being safe. Chile tops that list. Chile is a long, narrow country stretching down South America's southwestern edge. Its coastline runs almost 4,000 miles, putting it about as far from the major powers as you can get. Even if you're a global superpower, projecting military force to southern Chile is a logistical nightmare. The country is also protected by the Andes Mountains. If things get really bad, you can retreat into the mountains. But you probably won't need to. Chile is one of South America's most developed countries. It ranks 32nd out of 180 on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. That's higher than any South American country except Uruguay, and only 4 spots below the United States. GDP per capita is $6,700, which beats China. Infrastructure is solid. Democracy is functional. Crime rates are elevated compared to some parts of the world, at about 37.55 crimes per 1,000 people, but that's 10% lower than the United States. The murder rate is only 1.7 per 100,000 people compared to 5 in the US. What can you eat? Chile's agricultural output is impressive. Grapes, apples, kiwi fruit, wheat, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, blueberries, cherries, and onions. Chile is one of the world's biggest exporters of blueberries and cherries. The country's extreme geography, with deserts in the north and glaciers in the south, means common agricultural pests can't survive. Farms are always productive. For protein, Chile exports poultry, pork, and salmon. The 4,000-mile coastline guarantees abundant fish, with over 813 species available for small-scale fishing. You're not going hungry. Energy is the weak spot. Chile is working toward energy independence, with renewables making up 55.3% of power generation in 2022. Hydroelectric provides 23%, wind gives 10%, and solar contributes 16%. But as of 2023, Chile still imports 62.3% of its total energy supply. That means blackouts are likely during wartime, when global supply chains collapse. But blackouts are manageable. Getting hit by a cruise missile is not. Chile is also a net food importer, with only 1.7% of its territory being arable land. That sounds bad until you remember that in World War III, global supply chains are dead anyway. Chile will hoard its domestic production for itself, and with the rest of South America likely staying neutral, regional trade should keep markets functional enough. If you want to go really remote within Chile, head to Punta Arenas, the southernmost city with 100,000 people. It's a gateway to Antarctica. There are sheep and cattle. You'll be thousands of miles from any battlefield, quietly watching the world tear itself apart from the comfort of southern Patagonia. The only caveat with Chile is that its foreign policy has been shifting. Historically, Chile maintained a neutral, low-profile international stance. But recent administrations have been cozying up to the US and taking more active roles in regional diplomacy. There's even a joint US-Chile naval base, Fort Aguayo, in Concón, though it's just a training facility for peacekeeping exercises. Still, closer alignment with the US could theoretically make Chile slightly less safe. It's a low risk but worth noting. Argentina. If Chile doesn't work for you, Argentina is right next door. Argentina is the 8th largest country in the world at 2.8 million square kilometers. Most of the population of 46 million lives along the temperate coast, which means the vast Pampa and Patagonia regions are wide open for evacuation if needed. Argentina is an agricultural powerhouse. It produces enough grain, beef, soy, and other crops to not only feed its population, but also export massive surpluses. In a global war where food becomes a weapon, Argentina would be one of the few countries with enough to spare. Geographically, Argentina is incredibly isolated from likely conflict zones. It's at the southern tip of South America, about as far from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East as you can get without leaving the planet. No military planner is going to prioritize Argentina when there are far more valuable targets thousands of miles closer. Argentina also lacks major military alliances. It's technically part of some regional security agreements, but nothing that would automatically drag it into a world war. Historically, Argentina has tried to maintain a neutral stance in global conflicts, though recent diplomatic shifts under certain administrations have complicated that neutrality. Still, the country's strategic irrelevance works in your favor. Food security is excellent. Argentina is one of the world's top exporters of beef, wheat, and soybeans. The Pampas region is some of the most fertile land on Earth. Even if global trade collapses, Argentinians would eat well. The Itaipu Dam provides surplus electricity that gets exported to neighboring countries, so power wouldn't be an issue either. The downsides. Argentina's economy has been unstable for decades, with recurring inflation crises and political turbulence. If you're fleeing there during wartime, don't expect financial systems to be reliable. Also, recent administrations have been more aligned with Western powers, which could theoretically make Argentina a target if the war drags on for years and someone gets desperate. But again, that's a low probability scenario. Uruguay. Right between Argentina and Brazil sits Uruguay, and honestly, it might be the most underrated safe haven in South America. Uruguay has only 3.5 million people spread across 176 square kilometers. Its Atlantic coastline is far from major naval choke points, and it has virtually zero strategic value to any warring power. Uruguay consistently ranks high on peace and stability indexes. Corruption is low. Democracy is stable. Crime rates in rural areas are minimal. The country has cultivated a reputation for neutrality and has stayed out of regional conflicts for decades. It's basically the Switzerland of South America, minus the mountains and the Nazi gold. Food production is solid. Uruguay grows wheat, corn, rice, and soybeans. Livestock, especially cattle and sheep, are everywhere. Fishing along the coast provides additional protein. The country is small enough that you could theoretically travel across it in a day, which means supply lines would hold up better than in larger countries. Energy comes primarily from renewable sources. Hydroelectric power makes up the majority, with wind and solar contributing significant portions. Uruguay has been aggressive about becoming energy independent, and it's largely succeeded. You might deal with occasional blackouts if imported fuel runs out, but the core grid should stay functional. The major advantage of Uruguay is that nobody cares about it militarily. It's not part of any major alliance. It doesn't have resources that can't be found elsewhere in greater abundance. It's geographically isolated, but not so remote that modern infrastructure doesn't exist. If you want a boring, peaceful place to ride out World War III while still having access to electricity and grocery stores, Uruguay might be your best bet. Africa. We should talk about Africa, because an entire continent doesn't just disappear during a world war. The problem is that Africa has gotten increasingly entangled with great power politics. China has invested heavily in infrastructure projects across the continent. The US and European powers maintain significant influence. Russia has been expanding through mercenary groups and arms deals. When the great powers go to war, their various proxy interests in Africa could create localized conflicts. That said, North Africa is way too close to the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern theaters to be safe. Egypt controls the Suez Canal, which makes it strategically vital. The entire northern coastline would be in the danger zone, but the further south you go, the safer things get. South Africa, as the name suggests, is as far south as you can get. It's generally aligned with China and Russia through the BRICS framework, but it probably wouldn't want to get involved in a war happening thousands of miles away. Smart decision. Cape Town is the standout city. The Cape Town metro area has about 4.7 million people as of 2022, which makes it one of the larger cities on this list. The climate is Mediterranean, with summer temperatures around 80 degrees and winter temperatures around 55 degrees. Comfortable year-round. South Africa exported 3.9 million tons of fish in 2019. tuna, cod, catfish, herrings. The Western Cape, which hosts Cape Town, grows wheat, barley, and oats that contribute over 30% of the country's agricultural output. Soybeans and sugarcane are also major crops. You'd have a balanced diet with enough variety to stay healthy. The Cape of Good Hope was historically the primary shipping route between Europe and Asia before the Suez Canal opened in 1869. With disruptions up north during the war, traffic around the Cape would increase dramatically. That could bring trouble. We've already seen a preview with Houthi attacks in the Red Sea forcing ships to reroute around Africa. The bigger problem with South Africa is crime. The country has about 58.94 crimes per 1,000 people and a murder rate of 45 per 100,000 people. In terms of violent crime, it's ranked third most dangerous in the world. You'd need to be very careful about which neighborhood you settle in. Stick to the safer areas of Cape Town, and you'd probably be fine. Wander into the wrong district, and the war might be the least of your worries. Power supply is also unreliable. The national utility, Eskom, has failed to meet demand since 2007. Some areas experienced up to 12 hours of blackouts per day in 2023. World War III would make that worse, but again, blackouts are preferable to missiles. If you pick the right spot in Cape Town, you'd be safer from the war than almost anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere. Just make sure you do your research on crime statistics and have a solid plan for dealing with infrastructure issues. Paraguay. Let's go back to South America for one more option. Paraguay. This landlocked country sits right in the heart of the continent, bordered by Argentina, Brazil, and Bolivia. Population of about 7 million, spread across 452 square kilometers. It's one of the most overlooked countries in South America, which works in your favor. Paraguay has no military alliances that would drag it into World War III. It has no strategic resources that anyone desperately needs. Its geography makes it naturally isolated from coastal military operations. The country has cultivated a neutral foreign policy and stayed out of regional conflicts for decades. Agriculture is the backbone of the economy. Paraguay is a major exporter of soybeans, corn, wheat, and beef. The country is self-sufficient in food production and actually has surplus capacity. The Paraná River and other waterways provide abundant fresh water. Fishing in rivers and lakes supplements the diet. Energy is another strong point. Paraguay generates massive amounts of hydroelectric power through the Itaipu Dam, which it shares with Brazil. The country produces so much electricity that it exports the surplus. Even if global oil supplies get cut off, Paraguay would have reliable renewable energy. The climate is subtropical to temperate, depending on the region. No extreme cold, no extreme heat. Politically, Paraguay has had its share of instability historically, but the current government is relatively stable. Corruption is a problem, but not to the degree that it would endanger your survival. The major downside is that Paraguay is poor by South American standards. GDP per capita is only about $5,500. Infrastructure is underdeveloped compared to Chile or Argentina. Healthcare is limited. If you need advanced medical care during your stay, you might be out of luck. But if your priority is staying alive and having enough food and water, Paraguay checks all the boxes. It's boring, isolated, and irrelevant to global military strategy. Perfect. But here we are. The world is what it is. And it doesn't hurt to be prepared. I want to hear from you in the comments. Would you actually consider moving to any of these places? Do you think I missed somewhere that should be on the list? What are your own plans if World War III ever breaks out? Are you the type to bunker down where you are, or would you try to relocate? And honestly, do you think we're overreacting, or is this level of preparation justified given current global tensions? Let me know what you think. And if you found this video helpful, informative, or at least entertaining in a dark sort of way, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more content like this. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Stay safe out there. Let's hope we never need to use any of this information, but if we do, at least now you have a plan. I'll see you in the next one.